All right. Hello, everyone. It's 1 p.m. here in Finland, noon Central European time, and we're ready to get started with our next pro webinar. Presenter today will be Manna Insect CEO and founder Ykkä Marjanen. But before we get Ykkä going, a couple of quick pointers. First of all, welcome. My name is Tom. I'm the head of marketing with Manna Insect, and I will be the host for today. If you have any questions, feel free to add those to the questions box. I will ask those from Ykkä at the end of the session if there are any questions. Now, if you're viewing this as a recording later on, please note that as a pro member, you have access to all the webinar archives, all the free webinars, the pro webinars, as well as the Q&A sessions. And as a matter of fact, we still have this month, we have both Q&A and a free webinar coming up. So just a quick reminder. Um, Next week, we have a session that's coined How to Produce BSF Optimally in Outdoors versus in Climatized Modules. That is one of those free sessions. And then we have a Q&A session 27th of February with Ykkä once again. Ask us anything BSF farming related. So totally open board for questions. Today, the topic is concrete experience and results on effective breeding, and the recording will be sent to all the pro members of the Insect Farm Hub, as well as the Manna Insect Mind customers. Now, if you have any questions regarding the Mind setup, we have interesting news coming up soon, so please do get in touch with us at the Manna Insect website using the contact form. That said, welcome everyone. Ykkä, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, and hello everyone. So just before we start, a short reminder of where do we come from to this BSF and what is our background. So we have coming 7 years of experience on practical BSF production in micro, small and medium scales, using mainly modular approach and very much off-the-shelf, cost-effective, simple processes which can be taught to everyone. You know, no entomologists, no biologists involved. As a mission and clear goal to make BSF production profitable. And when I mean profitable, the price ranges has to be comparative to soy meal, as fish meal is already a very tough to beat from nutritional point of view. We've so far sold and operated in 40 countries, give or take, in all continents. We have customers from New Zealand to Colombia and everything between. So it gives us a lot of practical experience on what works, what doesn't work, which countries you can do, which type of business in BSF. So we come from a very practical approach to minimize and simplify everything. We have two main products. What we call Mind is a solution on how to create cost-effective and customized climate modules for BSF production. And what I mean a module, anything from a 20-foot shipping container to, 20 times 40 meter size space, which is climatized so that you can maximize the capacity, especially for growing parts, but also for breeding. And all the hardware can be locally sourced or found as locally as possible. So our proprietary solution is the software and the knowledge that we help the customers build these modules. Then we have Insect Farm Hub, which is about training and support, digital tools and a marketplace for all BSF farmers that is accessible over the phone or tablet or computer to help with the ecosystem support to actually making money. So in this particular webinar, we're talking about breeding, and I assume you have the basics. We have a webinar and many training materials on the basics of breeding, so I'm not gonna go over those details here. I'm talking more about the experience of breeding and scaling breeding for those people who have already experienced and most likely have had many problems and challenges around breeding. So I'll go over the critical parts that I consider in a successful BSF production, the principles in breeding and why breeding is so hard, and then how to avoid and how to improve breeding so that you can kind of scale beyond. Also, I want to talk about, because I have now a lot of experience through our customers, about outsourced breeding as a solution, which is coming more and more, let's say, interesting and realistic option in many countries. And then I want to leave some final remarks and remind on Q&A and how can you ask about this webinar. So BSF production in general, what is the critical part and how to make it as a success? One is that you have to remember that it's about routines and experience. So you cannot just jump on it and scale. It's like any skill. You have to start small. You have to do daily routines, and you cannot just avoid doing manual routines. So it's not just about, watching a couple of videos and then scaling to big time. It's actually grinding every day, starting with 10 trays, then 20 trays, then 50 trays, starting with breeding 1 cage, then 5 cages, and so on. This cannot be avoided. This is the critical part of doing it. And it's impossible in practice to just jump over learning in practice. The other part of doing routines and experience is to consistently remove barriers, minimize work tasks and phases, so that it becomes so simple that you can teach and train anyone within a couple days to do the basic routines, and you're not expecting them to be biologists or entomologists or otherwise specialists in BSF. This is another critical part. And you have to accept that it's better to get 80% of the capacity of the results by 20% effort than trying to get to the 100%, which typically takes 3-4 times more effort, and then is the, let's say, the result between are you going to make profit or not. Then, of course, the more stable and optimal your climate conditions for breeding and growing parts, the better you will produce, more stable and more predictable your production is. And then, of course, that allows you, especially in the business side, where you start to make commitments of delivery. And we acknowledge that in many parts of the world, there is a possibility to do it outdoors, and also the lack of infra and lack of capital doesn't really allow you to, especially at the beginning, build climatized modules, regardless how cheap they are. So we want to help and kind of acknowledge that you can start with outdoors, but then understand that the more stable your climate control is, the better you will advance after a certain point. Then again, something that we see that people rarely measure is that even if you're doing it alone in a micro scale, you have to understand what are the critical metrics. You have to log your results, like the number of eggs you got, how many pupa did you put, your recipe of growing, how many days, what is the size of the larvae, and all this. And you need to get daily, weekly, and monthly averages. And there are digital tools helping you do this. And this is what we are building in the Insect Farm Hub. So you don't have to be a statistician or an analyzer to learn how to do these things. But they are critical. Otherwise, you're going blind And I don't know a field or a sport or something where blind is good thing. And then relating that, of course, is that the capex, what do you get with the capex when you invest? What do you actually get? And then opex, the running costs, where do they come from and how do they relate? Eventually, you need to know the dollar per kilo of live larvae production cost. Because if you don't know that, you don't know how much profit you can make. Now, more on breeding. So the principles of breeding, and again, I assume you have some basics of breeding, so I'm not going to the kind of the kind of introduction or one on breeding. But it's important to understand there's basically an input and then output. Input in this case in breeding is pupa. So if you put 100,000 pupa at day one to a cage, your output eventually will be 5-day-old larvae, not eggs. Eggs is a middle step. Eventually, from breeding, you need to look it from a point of view of 5-doll production. And the 5-doll production will go into the growing part, and you use the 5 dolls to then fatten them, convert the bio-waste into larvae in 7 to 10 days. And that's then where you make the money. But in the breeding, it's not pupaing eggs out, but it's pupaing 5 dolls out. So the breeding includes the nursing part. And of course, it's about stable and optimal climate conditions, even more than in the growing part, because the flies are very sensitive. So you want to have 28 Celsius as much as possible during the day, a little bit lower during the night so that the flies can rest. Keep humidity high all the time. And then either you have access to a natural light, which is good, or then you replace that by artificial LED lights that are optimized for BSF at the level of 10 hours a day. Now, the other principle, again, coming back to the whole critical aspect of BSF production, is that you need to have very systematic production, and especially from egg to 5-day-olds. And I've seen many types of cages, watched a lot of YouTube videos where they talk about attractants, adding vegetation, leaves, and all these kind of things. However, the solutions I've seen which produce most grams of eggs per cubic meter have nothing inside except flies and maybe pupa. So just remember to kind of, there are distractions, and those really don't help. The less distractions, the less stuff there is in the cage, the better. And again, coming back to that, you have to learn how to do that yourself, and not just to listen people, because there are many ways to do it. You have to be comfortable that you know every aspects of that. Okay, so why is breeding so hard? So actually this is the thing which somewhat frustrates me sometimes, is that the people who don't know breeding, who hasn't yet done the BSF production themselves, they always focus on growing. They talk about big numbers. They have big plans to go to thousands of tons, and they forget that you need the fuel, and the fuel is the eggs, the 5-day-olds. So that is actually your priority, not the production capacity. The production capacity will come eventually if you get the breeding right and the 5-doll production right. But somehow people forget, or they don't even understand how difficult breeding is. And not just that you get some grams of eggs, but you get consistently kilos of eggs per day, so that you can convert them at the high conversion rate to 5-day-olds. I would say that is the absolutely most difficult part of the whole thing and most challenging. And people tend to underestimate how long it takes. So the flies are like pandas in a certain way. They mate when they want, and it's very hard for you to force them to do that. So even if you put 100,000 pupa every day or every week to a same cage, they will emerge as flies the same way. You have perfectly stable conditions. You're doing every routine exactly the same way. You will get varying number of eggs every time you collect them. And you have to accept this. Then the question is more or less, are you using average or lower end or higher end as your prediction of, okay, what can I do with this amount of eggs? But this will happen. You will never get to a point where you get 10 grams or 100 grams per day per cage systematically. So relating to this, I would say don't celebrate the record quantities. Celebrate that your lowest possible quantity that you have received, you have collected in a let's say a month period has risen. That's more to celebrate than the one or two high peaks that you will get. Again, another thing, we learned this in practice. I think most of the people who have done breeding learn this in practice, that it's very hard and quick to screw up the process, and it takes extremely long to recover. So for example, if you like we had a challenge that we had a humidifier that worked nicely for weeks and then suddenly didn't work anymore. So the humidity went from 75% to 35%. And we had other things. We didn't really fix it at the beginning. And the first week after it had broken, we got about the same number of eggs than previously. Okay, we thought that, okay, this is stupid. We don't need humidifier. We get the same number of eggs. Then week after that, we got half of that. And then at week 3, we realized that, okay, it's gonna be bad if we don't get the humidifier running. But when we fixed the humidifier, it still took us 5 weeks to get back to the same level. And I've seen this with our customers as well, is that it's so hard. You almost have to do a full cycle before you start to get back to the same results. So you have to just be more patient than you think on breeding. And that's why, regardless of how big production you're aiming, your first 3 to 4 months is purely about breeding and learning to breed, learning to produce eggs, and then convert those into 5 dolls. And don't even think about, and you will need to start scraping hundreds of grams of eggs before you're ready to start the actual production. And the other thing is that when you get to a level which is already very good, that you get 500 grams a day of eggs, you get about 80% conversion rate to 5 dolls. That's okay. That's already good. It's about 4 tons of bio waste a day conversion. But if you go from 500 grams to 5 kilos, it's not a linear process where you just make everything 10x. It doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, it's not a linear process, and a lot of challenges. Maybe from 500 grams is still double, but it just gets hard. Just trust me. There's ways to do that, but if you just know these things, at least you're already like much longer than if you just assume that everything's gonna be fine. Okay, not to be too negative and gloomy about this. There are ways to, let's say, minimize risks and challenges and kind of not repeating the same mistakes. One is that before you start breeding, make sure you just have pupa, and you have pupa plenty available, that you don't have to put 20,000 pupa. You can put 100,000, and you can put rather double the pupa than you need, so that you get plenty of flies. So unless you have this, there's also this somewhat weird effect with the flies, is that you have to exceed a certain threshold of number of flies in a space before really egg production starts. So it's 10,000 larvae, 10,000 flies is not 1/10 of 100,000 flies, it's 0. After a certain point, the 0 goes into some number, and after a certain point, there's an exponential change as well. So just make sure you have pupa, you get a lot of flies, and you're not stuck with, trying to get a couple thousand pupa here or there, because those flies are there, nothing will happen. The other part is that regardless if you get 1 gram of 100 or 100 grams, first focus on just repeating the tasks the same way. Don't panic. We did that mistake, is that we panicked. Monday, we got 50 grams. Next Monday, we got 1 gram, and we panicked. We did 5 different changes, and it took us 3-4 weeks before we got back to the rhythm of saying we can't do so many changes. We have to at least do like 4 or 5 weeks of same routine before you know that is it working or not. And then you do only one change, and that one change has to be there effect at least 3 weeks before you can do another change or revert back to the old way. And this is the frustrating part, and people don't understand who haven't done breeding that this has to be done. You cannot skip these steps. So even if you're getting 1 gram, it's much better that you get consistently 1 gram rather than you get one day 50 grams and another day 0 and anything between without you predicting or let's say guessing the result. That's much worse than systematically getting low number of grams, but at least you get them systematically. Then if you're doing it outdoors, just remember that any period during the day when it's below 26 Celsius or it's dry, you will lose productivity and it will go like on a cliff. So it doesn't kind of go little bit by little bit per Celsius. There's a cliff at 25, 26 Celsius, and it goes like 10 times lower. So just acknowledge this, that if you're doing outdoors, we recommend you start anything that is cheap and affordable to start. But just remember that there might be days or even weeks that you don't get anything or very little. And again, coming back to the last, like every point, is that don't scale based on your peak numbers. You can only scale based on your kind of worst numbers that you get in your production. And that's kind of your base level, what you can scale on. And you need to improve the kind of the bottom part, not the peak part. And again, I've seen people pre-invest into post-production growing prematurely, and they have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested into all these things, but they cannot use it because the breeding didn't scale, and they're stuck with very small quantities of eggs and 5 dolls because they kind of prematurely went to the growing and scaling the growing part. And this comes actually to a very good question and topic of outsourcing breeding. So without any practical issues, it's a no-brainer. There are very, very few chicken growers who breed their own chickens. 99% will buy chicks at 1 day old and focus on the growing part and then sell the chickens after that, or do the egg production. So this is a natural and a no-brainer in animal growing. However, because BSF is such a new industry, this separation hasn't really happened until recently. And most of the countries we talk and we do business with don't have a national provider, doesn't have an ecosystem where you can just buy 5 dolls. And I have to say, it has to be national almost even within EU, where there's no borders between countries, the shipping costs will ruin the kind of the practical business opportunity or business proposal of outsourced eggs. Or then you have to be committed to buying so much quantities that now you need to immediately have a large scale production facility. And what comes to eggs, the problem is that if you buy eggs, which everyone started selling at the beginning, you still need to do nursing. So what is 1 gram of eggs? Is it 10,000 larvae? Is it 20,000 larvae? Is it 30,000 larvae? If you pay per gram, but you don't know if you're gonna get 10,000 or 30,000, you're effectively paying either triple the cost of what you expect. So eggs are very sensitive, and you only know after 5 days what were the results. When we started, we had to semi-illegally import eggs from China. This was 2017, 2018. We bought $1 per gram, 500 grams. Effectively, I think we got 5 grams worth of larvae, like 100,000 larvae. So it was a pretty expensive eventually, even though the gram price was cheap. So there are now companies that sell either neonates, which is already better. They're already larvae, even though you have to do the nursing, or rather buy 5-day-olds, which you can put directly into food and you don't have to do nursing, and you know exactly how many you're buying, because now you're buying per larvae, you're not buying per gram. So the other part is that it will be 2 to 3 times more expensive per tray to buy those anyway, rather than you making yourself. But I think it's at that level, it's worth the cost, because just focusing on growing will just make you so much more scalable and cost efficient than including the breeding. So at those levels, it's still feasible to do. You can definitely scale much faster and focus on sales than spending 6 months to 10 months just getting the breeding right. And also you have to kind of remind that in the breeding, the personnel you have to hire to figure out breeding has to be pretty knowledgeable entomologists and biologists in most cases. In growing, it's more mechanical work, but breeding is more biological process. So in that sense, it's also a personal thing that you might not even find good enough people to work on breeding. But even if you find someone who you can buy 5-day-olds, I still recommend to continuously have inbreeding program as a backup and as a comparative result, and then of course have rather 2 than 1 provider, because if that provider has a catastrophe or stops doing it, decides not to sell anymore, or someone else buys that, you're screwed basically. And again, it's gonna take 6 months at least before you can ramp up your own breeding program. So keep it going, and then you can ramp up maybe in 2 months. Yeah, so final thoughts. It would be better if you can focus on breeding or growing. If your country or within your region, you see people talk about BSF, starting to, dabble with BSF, talk to chicken growers if they're willing to buy BSF. What is the pressure from soy meal and animal feed prices and purchases for them to consider alternatives? But if you don't see anyone that you can buy eggs or $5, consider actually starting a breeding business of selling $5, because I think there's a lot of people who are interested to start if you just lower the barrier and say, hey, we'll give you $5, or we'll sell you $5 with different business models. So I think it's worth to first focus purely on breeding, even if you decide later to do growing, but just focus on breeding and getting the breeding right. It's cheaper to start, You don't need that much quantities. You can do it with, you don't have to first go and actually find any biowaste sources. You can do it with commercial feed, because with breeding per gram of eggs, you don't need that much feed. So it doesn't really matter if you have to pay for the feed. And then you can buy like dry animal feed, like a chicken feed or something, and it stores well. You don't have to buy pre-processing equipment. You can just mix it with water, and you already have a process of producing pupa, the flies, the eggs, and then 5 dolls. So the only thing, of course, is that if your climate doesn't allow, you need to invest into some level of climatization. But we know even in Finland, in a Western context, we paid less than $2,000 for our first climatized setup using a green room or greenhouse, and then having a radiator and a humidifier, both just consumer stuff, $100 level. And yes, we had to go every day to go back and forth, but still we got pretty good results. So, and then of course we hope you can use and utilize the Insect Farm Hub for the free parts, and then of course with a little bit of pro membership cost, you get access to the more advanced courses and these, and start creating a local environment and sharing the knowledge that we provide. That's our idea, is that we share the knowledge so that you don't have to be jealous about the knowledge, and everyone gets the standard knowledge so that everyone becomes more professional quicker. And work together. Thank you. Hope this was useful. And I know there's a lot of challenges, but there's much more than you would initially expect when you start. But the sooner you realize these things, the sooner you have the right mindset, the faster you will get into a successful business.
Excellent. Thank you, Uka. Now, if you have any questions, now is the time to write those in the chat box or in the question section, and I will review those soon. There are no questions at this point. Just a couple of quick questions. Uka, you mentioned that Insect Farm Hub has content, lots of content related to BSF farming. But is there specifically breeding related training materials, tutorials, or other content?
Yes, so we are making new tutorials, but there's already courses on full ramp-up program at the pro side. And there's also a free introduction where we talk about breeding and the aspects of breeding already. So you can start with the free courses, and then there are a pro course, which is a full ramp-up program going from 0 in 8 weeks to a full production cycle with all the details and recipes and how to build the equipment, the cages and rotation of pupa and all the metrics and everything.
Right, and as all our attendees and probably also, I would estimate just about all who are viewing this as a recording will be our pro members. So that means that you also have access to all those pro materials that Uka mentioned, but also the webinar archive. So there's a lot of material, older material, though some of the information may be outdated if you're looking at really old webinar recordings, but there are webinar recordings also covering breeding related issues. Now, regarding the Insect Farm Hub's marketplace, you mentioned that it might be a good idea to start a breeding business. So just breeding and producing eggs. How about using the marketplace on promoting those eggs or neonates or other related products?
Yeah, like almost every conversation we have or have had so far with hundreds of people, or probably even thousands, is that everyone focuses on wanting to sell the larvae and the growing part, But eventually, at some point, they ask that, okay, where do I get the eggs or the 5-day olds? So it seems that everyone's kind of focused on the growing. They want to do growing, but there should be more. There's a bigger opportunity to now start a egg production business. And of course, the part of the Insect Farm Hub marketplace is that, where do you find your customers? Because it's going to be tens or hundreds of people in your country, in your local areas, and the Insect Farm Hub already has thousands of people. So if you put your listing into the marketplace, people who are within your country can find the services that you provide and can contact you. So that's the idea that of the marketplace, is that we've seen so much problems of people. We know better who's producing, let's say, eggs in Kenya than most Kenyan people. So we want to match these people because it's very hard to do locally on any other media.
Okay, excellent. We don't have any questions at the chat for now. So if those of you looking at this as a recording are interested in asking questions, we also have the AI mentor or assistant at the Insect Farm Hub. The mentor is trained with our materials, with our knowledge and relevant research, and it's been trained all the time to be better able to answer any questions that you may have regarding especially black soldier fly farming, but also the products and markets and all the other related stuff as well. So use the AI mentor, and if the AI mentor can't answer your questions, feel free to get in touch with us through the Manna Insect website or the contact side of the Insect Farm Hub. And send us questions, send us comments, and of course, especially if you have already a production set up, we'd love to discuss collaboration and the use of the marketplace. That said, thanks for joining. Thanks, Uka, for the brilliant presentation. And we'll be back next week with the next free webinar. Talk to you then. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.